So this morning we heard from a lot of our region's incumbents, and we had a prep call before this panel, and we had a nice guide set up, but there were so many provocative things that were said this morning that I tore up that guide, and we're going to dig into some of those topics that came up earlier this morning. So the panel is focused on getting us to a point where we're in a world of tech, we're traveling, but the traveler doesn't feel it. So let's start by polling the audience, and I'm going to ask you a yes or no question. So will the next 20 years give us tech we don't see but feel, and a world where the traveler truly reigns? So who thinks that, yes, the next 20 years will give us tech that we don't see but feel? How about a raise of hands? So we got about half the room. All right, who's completely against that? That's never going to happen here in 20 years. All right, so I guess everyone's on board here. So we can have a nice discussion about what things that you all are working on that'll get us to that point in time. So I'm going to ask each of you to give us 30 seconds on your background, and then give us a 30-second elevator pitch on what you're working on today. So let's start with you, Joe.
Sure. I grew up and lived in many different world's largest and some smallest countries. So I grew up in Shanghai, China, lived in the US for 10 years, then settled down in Singapore for the last 7 years. So big and small. I kind of like Singapore after these two other experiences. As a software engineer turned business now person to build HeyMax in Singapore, being a global travel and loyalty businesses. So that's about me. So going with the business now?
Yeah, 30 seconds.
Cool. Very brief. So imagine Citibank has some money that they want to spend to acquire you as a customer. Accor Hotel has some money they want to spend to let you know about their room offering. McDonald's want to know about their new burger, right? And the next time when you need to go out of this building, go somewhere else, you want to take a rideshare, Grab want to spend some money to tell you, hey, take me as your next choice. So what we do is we help funnel all these business very willingness to spend to acquire you, to turn that into your future travel credit in the format of Max Miles, the loyalty currency that we run. And the Max Miles, you may ask what it is. It's the world's best multi-connected loyalty currency that's already connected one-to-one transfer, no expiry, no fees, by the way, to 30+ airlines and hotels loyalty programs. So everyday spend into your loyalty currency. So this morning someone mentioned that they don't really like Meta, Google's business model squeezing out the value. So we squeeze out the middle for the travelers to funnel that, recirculate that into future travel spend. Because I work in Meta for almost 10 years. I know what it's like.
All right, so everyday spend turned into loyalty. Sarosh, so 30 seconds on your background, 30 seconds on your company.
So my background is formerly in tech, and then I do not know how, but I became a travel agent. Did that for a while, and came across a lot of the challenges that we deal with the industry. And I think the single biggest thing that I learned by being a travel agent was the matter of trust. I think if I ask everyone in this room, when it comes to shopping on Amazon, everyone shops seamlessly. You don't compare prices on Amazon. But if I were to say, do you want to go tomorrow, next week to Tokyo or London, each of us would shop at 10 different websites. We as human beings somehow believe there's a deal to be had. I do not know why, but when it comes to flights or hotels, we always shop, whether this is business travel or whether it's leisure travel. Spotnana came into existence January 2020. Little did we realize 1 month later what would happen, but our whole focus is building the infrastructure for travel. And how do we provide trust and transparency at the end of the day? How do you feel that the price that you got was the best possible price? Because today, even when you go on Google Flights, for the same flight, you'll see 10 different prices. And that's the biggest problem we're solving for, and we're doing this for the business travel industry. That's what we're focused on building this open platform that can provide everyone value in the ecosystem.
Vikas?
Yeah, 2 decades in travel, absolute travel nerd. Half of that was at Booking.com before, where I was based in Singapore for a little over 4 years. Saw the pandemic, lived it, and it made me a lot more humble in what all, like, you see travel from a very fresh perspective where when people are actually not traveling, and all the things that can be done. So that's the genesis of why I started specifically looking at still fulfilling that dream of the connected trip. What we do, I think Laura here just presented world face, right? Your face wherever you go, but in truth, like, the problem is real. Wherever we go, whenever we're booking our travel, right, we using multiple platforms, using the same set of information over and over again. You're going to the airport, your passport, visa, ID documents are checked 3 or 4 times, absolute system siloed, right? And now imagine a completely opposite layer, a trusted identity and profile layer that works everywhere. Everything you book, everywhere you go. That's what NeoKe is trying to solve, the identity backbone on top of which the global travel will operate in the future. So something like your own smart private agent that manages and authorizes your data for whatever use you want to have for that data. That's what NeoKe does.
Great. So some pretty big ideas here. So I want to kind of reflect back and dig into each of your journeys as founders. So Sarosh, you are our kind of straight and pure entrepreneur. So you've always had that entrepreneurial spirit. Joe and Vikas, you came maybe a little more atypical route. So you both started out with corporate jobs working for larger companies, and then you kind of shifted into entrepreneurial mode from there. Joe and Sarosh, you both have a passion for miles. So that's one thing that you both share. And so I want to kind of dig into each of your foundational stories and kind of bring out what led you to where you're at today. So Joe, you spent 10 years at Facebook. You led a team of engineers, so great job. You were here in Singapore leading a team of engineers. Sounds like a great gig. Like, what led you into where you're at today with HeyMax?
Yeah, so some of the world's greatest opportunities come from certain adversities, right? Our adversarial scenario was that during end of 2022, all the global tech companies started massive layoff. Being the smallest office in the big Facebook and Meta world, no pun intended, we got all kicked out instantly. I have so many great talents that. When you start a company, generally the hardest thing is to find the talent that you need to tap on their shoulder, need to beg them to consider quitting their high-paying job, because the best people, they're going to have a job somewhere very easily, right? So we are in this black swan event where suddenly we have more talents than in the market, than the market know what to do it for. So thought is a great game theory play to turn a disadvantage into advantage by becoming a founder, becoming an employer, rather than staying an employee. So that's how we got started on the idea, and then we kind of follow our passion into the travel and points, miles, and advertising business.
Sarosh, you started your career in consulting, so I suppose you've tried that side of the equation. You thought you wanted to become a VC, and I think you said you did maybe 150 interviews and you were never hired, so you failed them all. I presume you learned a few things during those interviews. You lived in your car at one point. Your apartment started on fire. So kind of 2 minutes, tell us about your foundational story and what's led you to where you're at today.
I did start my career in consulting, and the thing that I was obsessed while being at Deloitte was, how do I travel for free every year in front of the cabin when I go back to India? Miles. And that obsession is something that I just had intrinsically. How do I game the system, to be honest? Long story short, after I did my stint at Deloitte for 2 years, started my own tech startup. That failed, and that was in 2002 when the first .com bust happened. Deciding what to do next, had to stay back in the US and couldn't find a job. So I thought, 2 years consulting experience, 2 years working at doing my own startup in tech. I think I'm good enough to be an analyst in the software space with venture capitalists. I probably interviewed with everyone in the Bay Area, New York, and Boston. There's a joke, the Indian guy from Austin. And I interviewed, I would get to the final round, but I could just never close one of these jobs. During this period, I was running out of money and I was figuring out how do I survive in the US. All I knew was this mileage information, and back then there were no blogs. You started something called a Yahoo News group, and the Yahoo News group was called Spotnana back then. And all I would do is I'd post articles on how you could travel in front of the cabin, or how you could get the best mileage seats, or how do you move points from one credit card to an airline, and how do you maximize this. Pure obsession. One thing led to another. I had people who'd sign up to this Yahoo News group, learning more about miles, and I would just give away this information. When I started interviewing with all these venture capitalists, last I checked, most of them travel privately, but some do travel in the front of the cabin. And those that did, somehow the conversation in the interview would lead to the fact that how do I use my miles, or where they were traveling. When I didn't get any of these jobs, I realized that there's a massive opportunity. These guys travel in front of the cabin. How do I get discounted tickets? The first thing that happened in those early days was the way Spotnana really started off with, I know British Airways is not in this room, but I wiped out 48 million miles on British Airways without stepping on the plane. That's really what happened. And the other story about the mileage hack is I figured out how you could buy this special Kellogg's cereal boxes, and at the back of it would be this American Airlines mileage certificate. Wiped out several million miles on American Airlines too. Again, none of this was illegal, but I just found a loophole in the system. And you have to understand, when I was doing this, I didn't have a place to stay. I was literally living out of my car, going to one person's home to the other, because I was on my last of my savings. And I think one of the things you realize in life is in adversity, there's opportunity, and back then, you can only connect the dots backwards. So I was living at a friend's place, and the way I would do these mileage tickets is I'd put this ad on eBay, travel on the Concorde, which was a $18,000 to $20,000 ticket. I figured out how you could get it for $810. And that's how British Airways 48 million miles got wiped out. When we started Spotnana again, BA was very pissed at me, to say the least. But they changed their frequent flyer program worldwide because of this loophole that I found in the system. How you could move your points. If you all remember, there was something called Starwood Hotels, which got merged with Marriott. How you could buy these magazines. Those magazines would convert to Starwood Hotel points, which got into One World on Qantas and then on BA.
So you grew this business, I think, up to what, $70 million?
No, not that big. I wish, but no. Did that in the early first years, and in the first 2 years, a lot of these travel agents would buy these certificates or these mileage tickets. One thing led to another, and I started understanding that there are really discounted tickets. So the first iteration of Spotnana in 2004 was doing discounted first and business class tickets, actual legitimate ones, because I learned there is something called corporate TMCs or travel agencies that did this. And I found all these middlemen who had all these deals. That's where my obsession for the airline pricing came into play. How do you get the best value? And why are there different prices in the system? And that's how I learned and taught myself the system, etc. One thing led to another, and I grew that company. And over time, realized that from being a discounted first and business class agency, there's something called travel management companies. There's something called Concur. There are all these systems. Just learned and grew the business along the way. And I think in 2020, I realized that if I truly want to scale this business, I need to build technology, because I understood what was broken in the infrastructure. Why did I need to use 10 different systems? Why does someone have to wait for 8 hours to make a date change? Why are there so many different prices? Why does this exist? Why do we shop when it comes to travel? Because we don't trust what we see on the screen. That's led to the foundation of Spotnana, and here we are.
Vikas, tell us your founding story.
It's not as exciting.
What's that?
It's not as exciting as Sarosh. It's like that for sure.
So you worked for some global hotel chains. You were at Booking.com for a little bit.
Yes.
Obviously, pandemic. What led you to really, break ground in a category that we believe is going to be foundational in changing, frictionless travel. So tell us about kind of how you came up with this idea and what led you into founding this business.
The genesis was a travel post-COVID cross-continental flight. I missed the flight because I was standing in the line. or the transit, because I was standing in the line. They gave me a hotel to stay. I again stood in the line, and then got to the hotel for 4 hours or so, and then went back to the airport, again stood in the line, and then reached the destination, again stood in the line. I was like, what the hell is going on? Like, you know, and this day and age when, you know, digitalization is marketed fairly efficiently, the processes across the travel chain is fairly manual. So my view was I spent the last decade at that time at Booking to try to make it easier for people to experience the world. But it's just that what we solved is a topic of booking, right? But the whole travel is still very fragmented. And if you think about, like, you know, this idea of the connected trip, which I touched earlier, now somebody like a large incumbent would think about connected trip as vertical supply integration, and that's pretty much it. The incentives are not aligned to go all the way, right? So where is and who is going to work on that? And that was the whole ideation around falling in love with this problem. Of course, it's really deep work on understanding how the regulatory framework works, you know, how to kind of convince the airports to adopt this technology. How are they doing it today? And you know, quite largely, it's manual. So if there's a technology that can be built, you know, risk and decisioning, identity adoption and onboarding, and done in a way which is private and secure, that always works, and, you know, the data doesn't go like, you know, Ori, that is where this idea was, you know, started to take shape and really fell in love with the problem to solve. Now, in the age of AI, NeoKe is uniquely positioned to actually do this orchestration. You do need a data layer that can authorize your data as an individual to an entity which is trusted. And I think that's where I personally believe the travel will change, and we potentially could see an inversion of the business model where the user goes to platforms. Platforms could potentially come to the user because of what they unlock. So that's basically where we think we headed, and that's where that's why NeoKe is so interesting from probably the founder story. Yeah.
All right, so I want to reflect back on some comments that were made earlier today and just get your reaction to them. So on the hospitality panel, they talked about, you know, there was a lot of discussion around who owns the customer. So I want to get an answer from each of you. Who owns the customer? Joe?
We fundamentally believe that consumers own themselves. Customers, travelers own themselves. If given a choice, travelers like to own their own data, own their own experiences, own their own future, their potential, their aspiration, and their own value back to themselves. So very much so that we see that in the past, whenever companies try to declare the ownership of the customers for themselves, and then try to create, like, for example, walled gardens to have customers jump through hoops to stay in the ecosystem, then you kind of basically push away a lot of a customer. Sometimes it works for a small group of customers, but for those who truly looking to build a groundbreaking generational product, travel experiences, airline, hotels, or whatnot, it's the really important thing is to just build what customer want. Customer want to have ownership, feel in control for themselves, so they don't like when someone else say that they own them.
Sarosh, you agree?
Definitely. I think in our case, let's take the business travel vertical. In the business travel vertical, you have the corporation, and then you have travelers who belong to that corporation, and then you have suppliers. I think at the end of the day, the customer's data, it's between the corporation and that individual, and we believe we need to add value to it. We are only custodians of the data, we don't own it. And what you can do best is how to create value on top of that. That's how you create platforms at the end of the day.
Vikas, I think I know your answer on this one.
Yeah, but it's a flipped thinking around this. So the individuals, of course, own their data, but the corporations, or let's just say tech companies, need a lot of data to service the users as well. So I think there's, both needs to be served, but served in a way which is a fair value exchange. And I think this is where the thinking around, I'm going to centralize this information because I'm going to have some kind of a moat which goes in a data dump that we don't really know how to kind of like mine that data and make it really useful. But if there's a way to kind of understand the context of the user, you could really connect those dots. So I would argue that both needs to be served in a really fair value exchange.
You brought up the word moat, so I want to ask each of you. There's been some discussion here about who has the advantage as we're moving into this new platform shift. Incumbents have access to data, they've got distribution, they've got customers. Is that going to be the new moat? And what makes you all believe that you can kind of carve out some opportunity? Who wants to jump in on this one first? Maybe Sarosh?
Sure. I think let's break down the question so at least I can follow. About the incumbents. They definitely do have built a lot of the technology, but again, the incumbents, if you look at the way the world is going, let's talk of just airline offers and orders, etc. That is going to change. The distribution and content is going to change. We talk a lot about AI, but I'm not sure how many people say that for AI to really scale, you need new infrastructure. So I think the moat is about not only, back in the day, it was a system of record, especially in travel, and that's why data is fragmented all over the place. One of the biggest challenges in travel, or anyone building technology in travel, everyone will tell you is the data issue. And once you build the system of record, but on top of it is how are you going to build the system of intelligence? I think that's where the moat will be created. And I believe that as much as incumbents have some advantage, at least in the business travel space, I don't see a lot of innovation happening with the incumbents.
Yeah. Joe, you want to jump in on this one?
Yeah, I think I'd like to take a more fundamental first principle approach. Think about this, like really how much of the moat does the incumbent have, right? Everybody, if you look into your phone, probably everyone had on average between like 50 to 150 apps on your phone. Let's say take the more extreme view of your AI is able to do a lot more things for you into the future. What is the percentage of the app on your phone that you actually care to interact with, or you're supposed to care to interact with? You realize all the apps that's more functional, utilitarian, like your bank apps, your ride-sharing apps, even airline apps, only a few apps that truly get you engagement that you're supposed to enjoy the content, you enjoy the experience with, will win. But everything else is just finer tweaks that, if you force people to use the app more often, does it really help user? Is that really what customer wanted? I think there's some incumbents that's more forward-thinking that are thinking in this line of using their own advantage but truly align with the incentive user. I think these will have huge advantage deploying AIs into the world, right? So I think we've seen in the morning a lot of OTAs in the world are building their own AI. But my concern is that for their own company's long-term success, if the OTA's AI is truly to maximize their own revenue, then this will not have the right adoption by user, or user will always find the next agent that can do the same job but maximize the user's own value for them, right? So it's only truly the visionary incumbents who can break out of their own moat, not only to defend their own turf, but actually think about like more of a long-term thinking, breaking the innovator's dilemma. I think that will have a huge advantage that I think as startups, it's pretty hard to compete with.
So Vikas, as you think about where we're at today, in particular with SSI, how do you balance building where the industry is today versus kind of anticipating where it's going to be in the future? You've got limited resources. How do you kind of think about that balance?
Yeah, just to kind of like unpack a little bit more what SSI is. SSI is self-sovereign identity. It's this principle that you are the owner of your own data and you willfully give permissions of your data for the fair use of that data. In a way which is like you just need to know that I carry a passport instead of my whole data, right? And it's valid. So it is true that the speed of change in the space of SSI is really remarkable. Google just launched the AP2 implement protocol, which is agent-to-agent protocol, and that's completely built on SSI. it is assumed that roughly, over 500 million people would be consuming identity, which are by the government, some form of SSI, in the next 3 years, which actually lays this foundation of so much clunkiness around, fraud and so on and so forth, that can be really navigated in a really cheap way. Now, where the industry is going, it is like, my view is that in the next 3 to 4 years, 20% of the world's airports would be adopting SSI, which is that you will be able to get authorized before you even enter the airport, and by that time, you just walk with your face. I think this is really happening. I mean, NeoKe is a part of that change, and actually the very first company that is implementing that change. I think there is also an interesting angle around downstream profile. Now, within the agentic frameworks that we're working on, you need a profile agent to deliver the true agentic interface or autonomous interoperable experience. And I think we will also see that happening, and I think something that potentially Pete next year will announce. We're working on it.
Nice.
And yeah, so I mean, my view is it's going to be seamless, it's going to be autonomous, it's going to be fun, it's going to give a lot of time back to people.
All right, let's think about it in the future here. So exit strategies. So as a founder, you always should be planning. Obviously the exit is not the end goal. It's building, it's creating. But you should be thinking about exit. So maybe Sarosh, talk a little bit. Deep and Alok talked a little bit about it in their session, where they're thinking about acquiring companies a lot to keep the entrepreneur on site and learn and pull them into the organization as a way to create some entrepreneurialism. What's your thought about exit? Is it to get rich? Is it something else? What is it?
Exit. When I think about this, what is the mission of Spotnana? We always say travel is a human emotion. If I look back at what happened during COVID, if there was one industry that was decimated more than anything in the world, was the travel industry. But then travel industry is just so resilient, it came back stronger. I mean, just look at the prices of airline tickets these days. It's like insane, but that's besides the point. But I think from an exit strategy, our goal was, how do we build this platform? How do you build this platform that everyone else can add value to it at the end of the day? That is what the goal of Spotnana from day one is. The goal was never to become the world's largest business travel agency or anything. And you can only call yourself a platform when you create value for everyone else on top of it. And that's the goal for us at the end of the day. What does this lead to from an exit? I mean, there are so many people that have betted on making this journey possible. I think, not only taking care of your customers, investors, but, the employees. They believed in you when you had nothing. And in my case, you have to understand that I've been trying to do this for such a long time, but when you started the company in Jan of 2020, COVID happens in February, and you're like, how are you going to get through this? Especially for a travel startup, right? Everyone says no. No one wants to join you. And any engineer like, travel? Are you crazy? No way. But here we are, and I think it's the promises that you make. How do you live by those principles? At the end of the day, any business, whether it's travel, technology, anything, it's how do you carry people to the finish line? And I think if those are your first principles, that's what if an offer comes, I can say anything, but at the end of the day, I've taken money from investors, right? You have to do even right by them. So at some point of time, you realize that you'll have to balance that out and do what is right. And I think for us, the biggest thing is we would like to go public at some point of time.
Okay, let's move to a quick lightning round. We've got about a minute left. So let's start with you, Joe. What was the moment you knew you had to build it yourself that nobody else would?
Yeah, I think we ventured into Miles as a trial, then realized that, wow, I'm actually personally really into this, and I can connect with people on the ground, our potential customer, on the very personal level. And then the moment of true validation is my first Web and Travel conference earlier this year in Japan. We have one of the very senior person from OAG that just came to me and say, like, hey, love your product. I've already collected 10,000 miles. So that was a huge validation moment for me to know that we got it.
Sarosh, In one word, what will define the next 20 years of entrepreneurialism in travel?
Trust.
Trust. I thought that was going to be you, Vikas.
No, it's great.
Vikas, what keeps you up at night, and what gets you out of bed in the morning?
No, I think we sold that. Glenn Fogel said, don't keep yourself up. No, but I think the more important piece is, I think that as we move along in the journey of AI, the information exchange is going to be something to look at, right? It definitely, poses some serious humanitarian threats. We think about it all the time. Like, how do you share an ID data to an LLM? We don't. We figured out how to kind of do this in cryptographic proofs, like stuff like this, and we're at the center of playing with people's data. So I think those are the things that, how do we build governance really strongly that even if I'm not there in the future, it still continues. So those are the things that really keep me up at night.
All right, one last question for each of you. In the next 20, teleportation or moon travel? Joe?
Definitely teleportation.
Yes, Suhoon, we got one. Sarosh?
Teleportation.
Vikas?
Teleportation, I love that.
Yes.
Unanimous.
Ladies and gentlemen, Joe, Sarosh, and Vikas.
Thank you.
For the next 2 hours, what's waiting?